So it's the week before Christmas. You're preparing your Christmas Eve sermon, and you're looking for something new and interesting to share with the people in your congregation. And across your social media feed comes this video that tells you something that you had never heard before. Let's take a look at what this gentleman has to say about the Christmas story and the shepherds in Bethlehem.
And you see, he was born into the town of Bethlehem, which was famous for producing the perfect, blameless, spotless lambs that would then be sacrificed at the temple. And so when the wise men hear that there's going to be a baby born in a manger in Bethlehem, they freak out. Now it gets crazier, because that perfect, blameless, spotless lamb was often put into these mangers, into these feeding troughs to protect it, and they would wrap it in swaddling cloths.
Wow, that is an amazing piece of information. The only problem is this. If it was so important, why does he not share even one single Bible reference about this? You know, this is not a new story that he's telling. I have heard this story for more than 30 or maybe even 40 years. And I work to try and find out, where does this information come from? And the best that I can determine is that it comes from a 1906 book by a guy by the name of Adolf Edersheim, and his book, The Life and Times of Jesus the Messiah. And in that book, Edersheim makes this claim on page 131. He says that, quote, the Migdal Eder, which is referring to the area of Bethlehem, a watchtower there, was not the watchtower for the ordinary flocks which pastured on the barren sheep ground beyond Bethlehem, but lay close to the town on the road to Jerusalem. And then he says this, a passage in the Mishnah, we'll talk about that in a moment, leads us to the conclusion that the flocks which pastured there were destined for temple sacrifices. And accordingly, the shepherd who watched over them were not ordinary shepherds. Well, that's a really interesting statement to make. There's only a couple of problems with this statement. First of all, the Mishnah that Edersheim is using in order to support this theory was actually not compiled until 200 years after the birth of Christ. That doesn't mean that it doesn't contain maybe some real traditions and historical information that go back to the time of Jesus, but 200 years is a long time out to use a source like that. But even more, I would say, damaging to his case is the fact that if you turn to Mishnah Shekalim 7:4, the passage that he's quoting, look at, there it is on your screen. If you take a look at it, he's not actually quoting it correctly. This passage says nothing about Passover lambs being raised specially in Bethlehem. Instead, the passage is about what you should do if you find a lamb wandering in the vicinity of Jerusalem, that you should assume that that lamb was intended for sacrifice and had escaped, and therefore you should return it to the temple. And then it says, if you find it even as far as Migdal Eder, that is the area of Bethlehem, even several miles away, that is, you should assume that it is for sacrifice. So, what we find is there is absolutely no support for the idea that the lambs that were being raised in Bethlehem were there and were specially being preserved and watched over for Passover. The other claims that are made in this video, that lambs were then put into a feeding trough and wrapped in swaddling clothes in order to protect them as an unblemished lamb, also has absolutely no historical truth to it. In fact, Edersheim doesn't mention it, and I think what has happened is these are apocryphal statements that have been added to his own claims. Here's the thing, folks. If you're looking to preach on the Christmas story from Luke chapter 2 and the shepherds, Luke has given you all that you need to know. There's enough information in there about the shepherds that you don't need to go out looking for apocryphal statements that may sound good, but actually aren't historically accurate. Keep in mind, if you find something about the Bible, whether the Christmas story or other, and it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. I'm Dr. John Byron, and these are my short talks called Coffee with a Scholar. If you are interested in hearing more about what I have to say, please visit my website at johnbyronphd.com and drop me a comment in below to let me know that you're watching. Take care and have a Merry Christmas.